About a year ago, I was soldering components onto a circuit board. I set the soldering iron down flat on my workbench and looked at the solder joints. Instead of placing it on the bench, I should have put the soldering iron back in its stand. Not only would this prevent it from burning anything, but also when you grab it, you have to do so by the handle. Still looking at the circuit board, I went to grab the soldering iron like I would a screwdriver. Only I didn't grab the handle, I grabbed the protective pipe that covers the heater, which was probably around 500 degrees Fahrenheit. I remember grabbing it, a split-second delay, and then a sharp buzzing pain shot up through my fingers. From what I can recall, it felt like red-hot sandpaper was being pressed against my fingers with a belt sander. I dropped the soldering iron, ran to the nearest sink, and put my fingers under cold water. I ended up having first and second degree burns on my right index, middle, and ring fingers. Compared to previous cuts, punctures, and bruises, that burn was way more painful. As always, there's a scientific reason as to why. Welcome to Dark Science. To understand burns, and pain in general, we first need to understand how pain is transmitted. Your body contains specialized sensory nerve endings called nociceptors that detect potentially damaging mechanical, thermal, and chemical stimuli. For example, mechanosensitive ion channels, called piezo channels, respond to excessive pressure. When a mechanical force exceeds a pressure threshold, these ion channels become deformed and open. Upon opening, sodium and calcium ions are released and bind to local nociceptors, generating an electrical signal that's sent to your brain, which triggers a pain response. If you gently pinch your skin, the pressure is below the threshold and you're only activating touch receptors. But if you pinch very hard, you feel a sharp pain sensation. This is because the mechanosensitive ion channels are being opened and release ions which activate local nociceptors. There's also ion channels that are sensitive to temperature called TRPV1 heat receptors. When the temperature reaches 109 degrees Fahrenheit or greater, proteins in the central pore of the channel change shape and open. This allows sodium and calcium ions to flow through and activate nociceptors. Lastly, some chemicals can activate temperature-sensitive TRPV1 heat receptors. The best example is capsaicin, the compound responsible for the spiciness in peppers. When capsaicin contacts the mouth, skin, eyes, or an open wound, it activates TRPV1 heat receptors, causing the brain to activate a burn sensation. But there is another kind of chemical signal that your own body produces, called cytokines. Cytokines are messenger proteins released by immune cells in damaged tissue after an injury. They bind to nociceptors and other immune cells, triggering inflammation and increasing pain sensitivity in the injured area. When cells are damaged by a traumatic injury, such as a cut or blunt force trauma, they release proteins called alarmins that signal tissue damage. These signals stimulate nearby immune cells in surviving tissue to produce and secrete cytokines. These cytokines then bind to nociceptors, increasing their sensitivity, making the injury more painful. This brings us to burns. A burn is the transfer of thermal energy from a hot surface to tissue. I'm not talking about you grabbed a hot plate out of the dishwasher. I'm talking about full-on touching a hot surface, well over 400 degrees Fahrenheit, with the intention it won't be hot. Think of an exposed leg touching an exhaust pipe on a motorcycle, or grabbing a ceramic dish just pulled out of the oven. This transfer of thermal energy to tissue is not only instant, it's also three-dimensional. Heat spreads across the surface of the skin and down into deeper tissue layers. The larger surface area activates millions of heat receptors and cells in an instant. By contrast, a cut, unless it's very deep, is mostly relegated to the surface of the skin and only cuts a narrow line of cells. Far less receptors and cells are injured as a result. When cells are exposed to high temperatures, their lipid-based cell membrane becomes disrupted. It loses its structural integrity as intracellular contents start to leak out, and it ruptures apart. Alarmins are released, cytokines are produced, and nociceptors are signaled. The three-dimensional injury translates to a significant amount of cytokines being produced, and a more intense pain sensation. But what's deceiving is you don't feel the extent of this pain sensitivity all at once. In cuts, cell damage is instant, so all the pain signaling that will happen happens in the moment. With burns, however, there is a more gradual introduction to pain. Depending on the severity of the burn, there is a gradient of damage. First-degree burns don't have a gradient of damage, but second and third-degree burns do. The further you are from the burn site, the less damage there is. The area exposed to the hottest temperatures is called the zone of coagulation. This is total destruction of tissue, protein denaturation, and damaged blood vessels. This is where the pain is the highest. Outside of this is the zone of stasis. Here, tissue is damaged but not as severely, and blood flow is moderately affected. Beyond this is the zone of hyperemia, which has the least damage and recovers with tissue intact. In the zone of coagulation, cytokine production is very fast, because cells here are already ruptured and destroyed. In the zone of stasis, there's damage, but it's less severe, so it takes longer for cells to break down from loss of membrane integrity. The zone of hyperemia has some damaged tissue as well, but it's even less severe. It's as if cells in the burn zones are on a timer. The further you move away from ground zero, the longer the timer is for cells to break down and signal pain receptors. However, once cells have ruptured and kicked off cytokine production, you feel a wave of pain return. This pain is from cytokines increasing heat sensitivity of TRPV1 heat receptors in the area. When cytokines bind to heat receptors, they cause a protein in the ion channel to change shape. This causes the ion channel to open when exposed to temperatures lower than 109 degrees Fahrenheit, thus causing a pain response to any exposure to heat. A counter you can do to reduce this pain sensitivity is to run cool water over the burn. Colder temperatures reduce kinetic energy, which slows the transmission of nerve signals. This is enough to dampen the intensity and keep the pain at bay. The extent of the pain also depends on the degree of the burn. There are 4 degrees of damage a burn can have on tissue. A first-degree burn is the least destructive and least painful. These happen from being too close to a source of radiating heat or a light touch to a hot surface. It only affects the top layer of the epidermis, so the pain is usually short-lasting. Visually, it's classified as red swollen skin, such as a sunburn. Second-degree burns, like the kind I got from grabbing the soldering iron, are very painful. The heat is much higher and the exposure is often longer. Burns reach from the epidermis down to the top layer of the dermis. The top layer of skin often has fluid-filled blisters with a shiny red or white appearance. Third-degree burns spread through the epidermis and a large portion of the dermis. The zone of coagulation, the area exposed to the highest temperatures, has little to no pain as the nerve endings have been destroyed. The surrounding tissue consists of second and first-degree burns and have intact nerve endings, causing extreme pain. Lastly, fourth-degree burns burn through the entire top layer of skin, down to subcutaneous fat, muscle, and sometimes even bone. Fat beneath the skin will sometimes melt if not totally burned, and connective tissues and tendons can be so damaged that muscle cannot contract. Due to the depth and heat exposure, fourth-degree burns are most commonly found in people trapped in house fires or exposed to high-voltage electricity. To recap, burns generally hurt more than cuts because they have more surface area both on top and beneath the skin. Cuts, by contrast, are usually much smaller and more superficial. After the initial burn pain, there is a period where the wound hurts less and then begins to hurt more later on. This delay in pain is due to cells outside the zone of coagulation that aren't as badly damaged and take longer to break down. Once ruptured, they initiate a process that creates messenger proteins that heighten pain sensitivity in the area. This is why you should put cool water or an ice pack over the burn to slow nerve signaling and reduce the pain. Sometimes science can be seen as difficult, foreign, and even boring. Yet, there are times when science grabs our attention and draws us in, yearning for more answers. Often, what draws us in are topics that are dark, macabre, or terrifying. It's with the intention of this video that you too were drawn in and sought to have your questions answered. Thanks for watching Dark Science.